Geht's bei dir schon? Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you're sitting right now and will be following this very interesting, hopefully interesting event. You are here in the Summer Academy 2020 online version, and you will attend the event A23, which is Social Protection, Climate Change, and COVID-19, learning from non-state actors in Indonesia. We welcome all of you, panelists, hosts, and listeners from all over the world, and we are very happy to see so much interest for this topic. According to the figures from yesterday, we have roughly around 350 registrations, which is great for us. You know, normally the Summer Academy is a closed in-person program where we invite up to 30 participants from all over the world. The COVID-19 situation now made a change of format necessary, and we have the online version. The advantage is that we are having now a way bigger outreach and higher visibility. This also goes hand in hand with a lot of more of organizational issues. And here we deeply thank our project partners from UNU EHS, MCAI, LMU Munich, and UNFCCC, because without their support and without their help, it wouldn't have been possible to have this online event. The agenda for today is very easy to understand. We will have a first or short content introduction by Coco Warner, our friend from UNFCCC. Afterwards, we have 4 presentations of the 4 speakers. The order will be Thomas Loster, then Silvia Julianti, afterwards Daniel Stadtmüller, and afterwards Pranav Prashad, where you will have maybe 1 or 2 minutes time to ask direct questions. And then we have reserved roughly 30 to 40 minutes in the end for an open Q&A session and also for a panel discussion. So there will be enough time, hopefully, to discuss your individual questions. Some organizational issues. If you have questions in between, please feel free to ask them, but use the Q&A section. Don't use the chat room because this gets a bit fuzzy in the end, but the Q&A section will work perfectly fine. And we will try to answer the questions already during the presentations. And of course, those which are still open, we will try to tackle at the end during the panel discussion. One further information, the event is also being live streamed on social media, Facebook amongst others, and from there we will might get 1 or 2 questions as well. During the opening of the Summer Academy 1.5 weeks ago, we heard that the responsibility for social protection of all people in a country should be within the government. However, as we all know, due to different reasons, this is not always possible. And this is then when other actors, such as, for example, NGOs, private sector, but also supranational aid or UN organizations have to step in and support countries in their task to provide social protection for all people. Under the lead of Coco Warner from the UNFCCC, we will hear now and today more about the role of these non-state actors when it comes to social protection, climate change, and potential impacts of COVID-19. So this was my very short introduction. I wish all of you a pleasant online seminar, a very interesting and insightful one, and hand now over to Coco Warner and wish all of us a very interesting webinar. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Christian, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you, hundreds of participants across the world who have joined us. It's terrific that you're here. And you know, what we're talking about today is social protection. and the role not only of governments, as Christian has said, but the role of many of us who play different roles. Not everyone works for a government. And when you think about social protection, it has so many different facets. There's a role for civil society, for faith-based groups, for the private sector, and all of these working together, everything in between. The challenge is really enormous. And today, together with you, we have an opportunity to listen to a fantastic group of panelists. We're going to share some of those non-state actor perspectives. So we are going to now quickly introduce these wonderful panelists, and then we'll switch right over. So what you see there on that's me. I'm Coco. I work at UNFCCC. You can read the slide. And it's terrific to be here with you today. Maybe we can go to the next slide, Himanshu. And I'd like to introduce you to Thomas Loster. Many of you know of Thomas, either you know him personally or by reputation. Thomas is the chairman of Munich Re Foundation, and he is really one of the world leaders on climate data, on things like microinsurance, and tools that can help protect the poor. Thomas has many years of experience working in the field, also with the private sector, sustainability, and really helping understand risk and applying that, closing the knowledge gaps between knowledge so the action can be taken. Thomas is your man for that. We're so excited to hear you, Thomas. Next, Himanshu. Sylvia Yulianti is a senior partnerships manager at Atma Connect. For many years, Sylvia has been enhancing partnerships with different stakeholders in Indonesia. So again, we're going to take a deep dive in the Indonesian experience with social protection, where so many non-governmental actors play a role. Sylvia has been working for almost 20 years, both in the profit and nonprofit sectors, and she has an interest in the field of environment, sustainability, and community development. Sylvia, we're so excited to hear you. And the next is Daniel Stadtmüller. Daniel is a neighbor of mine here in Germany, in Bonn, Germany. Daniel is Senior Policy Advisor and Team Lead at the Secretariat of the Ensure Resilience Global Partnership. He focuses on the implementation activities of this really important partnership, which right now, Daniel, you may correct me, but Ensure Resilience is one of the leading nodes globally for insurers and risk managers who are coming together to help governments and other actors find risk transfer solutions for vulnerable countries and vulnerable people. So it's really neat to have you, and we're excited to hear about your perspective from that network and that Ensure Resilience perspective. And then finally, last but not least, Pranav Prashad is Senior Technical Officer at the International Labor Organization. And he's coming to us from the Impact Insurance Facility, which for many years has been really focusing on a suite of tools and how to make sure those tools are applied to really help close the gap between ideas and practical implementation to help vulnerable people manage their risk. Pranav provides technical expertise on agricultural insurance, distribution and mobile services, as well as the use of technology and insurance. He's really on the cutting edge, and the cutting edge, especially in Pranav, you can add more, of course, but especially in the global south, where these tools are not only so needed, but where a lot of the innovation today is emerging. So it's just super exciting to hear you. And so that was our introduction. And maybe now we can go over to you, Thomas, for your introductory remarks. And Thomas, if you could unmute.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Coco. Well, good morning here in Europe. Good evening in Asia. Very early good morning in the West, in the USA. So my name is Thomas Loster, and I was asked by Coco and by Christian to a bit frame the issue. So why do we need a framing? Because we will talk a lot about insurance today. And some of you may not really know what the insurance sector is doing in this field of inclusive insurance, social protection, and so on. Some of you might even think that insurers try to steal the money from the poor. They need the money for food, and now an insurer comes and wants to take premiums. Or some of you might think they are just crooks with ties and nice cars. So let me frame the issue and let me get together what you will be hearing in the next good hour, how we see this from the insurance sector. I'm in the sector since 30 years now, so I think I'm old enough to be able to tell. Wait a second, now I will share my screen. So here we go. Do you see it?
Yes, it looks good.
Okay, so input framing social protection and climate change in Indonesia. And I will just also address inclusive insurance, which was earlier called microinsurance, and climate risk insurance. We have Pranav here, we have Daniel here, and they are the champions in these fields. So I will frame for you a little bit also. So when we talk about these insureds, we see three levels. And on the left-hand side, you see our name for it. It's macro scale. Once we speak about sovereign insurance, once we speak about insurance for governments. Here you see the president making a deal with a lady from the African system. Then we have mesoscale. This is services that reach thousands of people. I will, of course, give you better pictures of what it is. Meso level means you work with an association, with a cooperative bank, and they might have 10,000 clients. So you reach a large group of people. And micro scale goes really down to the grassroots level when you give a policy to an individual. In this case, on the right-hand side, the lady has got a property insurance for her house in India. And the left-hand side lady is a teacher who bought rain insurance in case a hurricane would flood her home in St. Lucia. And on the right-hand side, you will find in the handout what types of schemes are existing in these worlds. So we need not read this fully now. As you might know, as you should know, the Munich Re Foundation, together with the Microinsurance Network and the ILO, Pranav is an old friend and old fighter with us. We host the world's largest conference for inclusive insurance. The next one will take place in Jamaica. You are, of course, invited to participate. And you see it's really a big thing which we are running together with our friends with Pranav, with also Insure Resilience last year. And there we discuss solutions for people. There we discuss also social protection. On the middle upper side, you see President Uribe, who gave a 40-minute speech in the conference in Colombia, and he spoke 40 minutes about the importance of families and family security as one pillar of a good state. And if you look to the lower right-hand side, you see a young girl from Peru. Her mother is having a tiny farm, and they also have social protection in case the mother or father has an accident. There will be enough money to go to the hospital, and the kid is safe, and the future of the kid is safe, and she does never fall into the poverty trap. So this is the kind of discussions we are having. And if you think insurance contract has many clauses, little tiny words, very difficult to read, very difficult to understand. This is an insurance policy which was given out in Tanzania. It's covering 4 head family for health risks close to the Kilimanjaro area. So if the circumstances are different, literacy is difficult, then of course all of the insurance products are adapting to the situation. You need not only think of complex agreements. So let's go to the meso level. Here you see friends from the Munich Climate Insurance Initiative. The black guys are farmers and ministers in St. Lucia, and they discuss with the white guy who was from Allianz Insurance, and Gabi Ram on the right-hand side, lower right-hand side, she's a GIZ consultant. They discuss what do farmers need, and the result of these discussions is, as a rule, farmers in Jamaica do not need extra protection, but young farmers who just entered business, they need protection in case there would be a large storm in a year. So with GIZ, a solution was found. This was done by MCI, who you see in this seminar quite often. You saw Sönke Kreft maybe. So this is how such a mesoscale system would work. You see a typical bank, again in St. Lucia on the right-hand side, you see the little C's, these are the clients, and they all go to the cooperative bank and do the bank business there. So it's a few hundred for one of these banks. And these cooperative banks, they aggregate all their clients. We call aggregate them because the administration is already done. And then this insurer in the middle has access to the global insurance and reinsurance market and can provide this social protection for these individual clients here who are members of a bank, but it could also be an association, a women's self-help group whatsoever. And here you see that tons of these public-private partnerships are already existing all around the globe. Most of them here are Nat Cat, I must say, also earthquake, partly it's climate change. But you see, there is no border, and we could never excuse and say, no, it doesn't work in my country, it doesn't work in my region. It works everywhere, and we just need to bring the partners together. Here, a sovereign example, a large drought pool in Africa, the African risk capacity, and you see they are having 34 members. When they were founded, already 32 members signed that they want to have a drought protection during hard droughts, and others of you know the Caribbean system, the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility. They have some 25 member countries. So it can be done, and in case of trouble, the government gets money like 10 million, 5 million, not to make everybody happy, but to repair the most urgent damages. And since our session is called COVID in the world, I share an expert opinion, and I'm a bit vague because I'm the expert who is giving this slide. So in the COVID time, we see that people, decision makers, scientists, and economists, they are all involved. And what we all see, and this is not a secret, we see more demand for social protection around the globe. We see already more debate, not only about medical solutions, but also about social security. We see many more approaches, new partnerships, new friendships in order to come to solutions. And we see totally new partners, and they together think, how can we solve the issue? So speaking from the COVID perspective, I see a huge boosting of social protection solutions. And this will really change the world. So COVID can be a game changer for social protection in many countries and can lead to very positive results. Last slide, what we need trust. You need to trust the private sector people. They need to trust the politicians and the clients as well. You need time. It's not an overnight business. It needs sometimes 3 years, 5 years, sometimes even longer. And you must use the appropriate technique. And so with this last technique, I see that there are so many debates revolving around how do we get it right. And I'm very positive that we will see a very good future for improving social protection. With this, I hand the word back to Coco.
Thank you so much, Thomas. And for any of you who are wondering, how do insurance tools or risk transfer tools fit into social protection? That is exactly what Thomas and Sylvia, Daniel, and Pranav are helping us understand. There's so many different parts of helping people weather life storms. And Thomas has just explained there are different levels, macro, meso, micro. And so for all of you, use the chat box, also the Q&A to put in your questions. After we hear our speakers, as Christian explained, we're going to have a chance then to dive in and hear just a little bit more. Thank you so much, Thomas. And now, Sylvia, if we could head over to you, and we're so curious to hear what your experience working in Indonesia has been like. You have a lot of experience working with nonprofit as well as profit, and just we're all ears. We're so excited to hear you. Please. And Sylvia, I'm not sure if your mute is on. Maybe just quickly check.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Walking and
Great, we can hear you. Back up 5 seconds.
Can you see my screen now? Yeah, okay. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon from my side of the world. Good evening, good night for the rest of the world. It's quite a global world now. So I'm Sylvia Yulianti. I'm a senior partnership manager for Atma Connect. Atma Connect is one of a non-state actors. We try to put seeds of social protections, at least amongst people in Indonesia right now. So first, I'm going to introduce you with Ibu Siti Sanisa. She's one of our friends. She was one of the victims of a Lombok disaster back in 2018. So she's now one of our active users. She's one of the 1.7 billion people affected globally during the past 9 years with the natural disaster occurred everywhere, and the climate change even make it worse. With 1.4 trillion lost and 1 million people killed. And Ibu Siti is also a woman victim that, according to a study, are 40 times more likely to die during a disaster. So looking back, we found this interesting article, learning a lesson from Fukushima disaster in Japan. So they conclude that social networks matters more than bottled water and batteries. This really inspired us that indeed the social network is important. That's why we create this platform called Atmago. So we start the project in Indonesia. So we have a tag that neighbors, helping neighbors. It's kind of like community-based platform that enable people at the local level to connect to each other. So the nature of Atmago is hyper-local, and we rely on user-generated content. So we have a lot of writing training for people on the ground. And we focus on people helping people. And according to our research before developing this, that most of low-income communities having smartphone, but in a very basic level. So that's why we try to develop this app using a low resource setting. So with Atmago, whether it's in the website or in the application, user can make reports, get alerts. We get like a flood alerts, so we connect it with other system, government-owned system also to get a alert on earthquake, because you name it in Indonesia, you have every kind of disaster here, natural disaster. And then user could post and read local information shared by other users. And then they can also announce their event. So others might know that there'll be an event, a community-based event that will be held in their area. And also we try to build entrepreneurship through this category of finding jobs. So we encourage users to post information about job that really like informal job that you cannot find in Google. It's really like very local and informal job. And it received a lot of attention. So we got a partnership with Qualcomm back then, and we got a third party to conduct a research towards 350 respondents in Jakarta in the flood-prone area. And the survey concluded that at scale of 10%, Atmago could save Jakarta's 10% of Jakarta's population. Atmago could save Jakarta's resident. On these numbers. So we really try to involve in all cycle of disasters. So starting from mitigation, so we conduct not only focus on our platform online, but also with the field activities like multi-education, a community initiative, and a public policy. And then with the early warning system in preparedness, and also during the emergency, we also try to, it's proven in Lombok and Palu. At that time, we help people finding information about where the shelter available, where the clean water available, and it really helped them. And then we also involved in recovery phase, where we try to support them in psychosocial support, economic recovery, and rebuilding communities. So we really try to involve in all this cycle. This is this example of our activities. Of course, this during before pandemic, yeah. So we create a lot of activities. We support community initiative activities, like student cleaning up the beach. And the second upper picture is where we try to introduce hydroponic in the to answer the challenge of urban farming in this limited space. So we also in the middle below is like one of my friend. He was in Palu back then, try to conduct like psychosocial support for children of the victim of the Palu disaster. So until today, we reached 6 million users all over Indonesia in more than 100 district and municipalities all over Indonesia. That possibly happened because of our network, our partnership with various organizations, be it an international organization or private company, and we also won some global resilience award for our initiative. Right after the COVID emergency declared by the government of Indonesia around March, we launched this, we call it microsite of COVID-19. So basically like a sister of our platform Atmago. So we really try to make like a one-stop solution, one-stop platform that enable people to get update about the current situation for COVID in Indonesia. So we have daily stat. We also have psychosocial telecounseling. So it's been interesting because a lot of people start to get disturbed, so to speak, and mostly a woman, yeah, during this working from home situation and everything, the lockdown situation. And then we also have radio streaming, that we have program sharing of small business that struggle during this pandemic. And then we also have discussion forum. It originally designed for like sharing information about what I have and what I need. But now we are shifting with the recent development. We're going to shift it into how to call it a true story from the survivor of COVID, because we witness more and more a story from the field about the survivor, to really make people understand that it really happened. Because I think all over the world still there is a doubt, and people try and underestimate the situation. But yeah, we try to put a story from a real story from the survivor. So we also connected with our Atmago, because we received a lot of information related with local initiative on struggling with COVID. Yeah, be it spraying disinfectant, be it spreading the aid, or even the campaign for awareness raising. So we try to collect that stories also in this microsite. So the last part is like the education materials. So anytime we see like materials that might be useful for public to know, be it audio, visual, or video, so we put it there so people might have like material to understand about the situation. So from technological side, because we are an IT-based non-profit organization, we really try to keep improving ourselves, and our aim is create mesh networks. So it's like kind of like a network that enable people during disaster without a signal, but still able to connect to each other through phone, from phone to phone. And then we're also doing the connection with the private and government service. So we're connected with PMKG, our weather body. So we receive alert about the recent disaster that might happen. And our ultimate vision is to use machine learning and artificial intelligence to identify community vulnerable and its for resilience. So there is a saying from a journalist in US that said like bad things happen in the world, and then stories of ordinary people doing it, and we can get stories of ordinary people during the bad things, during the bad times, who are doing extraordinary things. So that's what we believe. Yeah, in Atmago we believe that we try to put stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. So that's pretty much from us about our platform. So back to Coco.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. I think your pictures are so beautiful, and I think you've really helped us understand how you're bridging some of the gaps. One quote that you mentioned early on was, social protection matters more than water or even batteries in the time of a disruption. I think that really says a lot. We had a question coming in from Callie, and for all of you listening, please put your questions in the Q&A or in the chat box. We're collecting those, and we're going to get to those after our next two speakers. But Callie mentioned, how do you close this gap between people who might not have a cell phone, or connection goes down during some kind of disruption, a disaster event. And I think you, Thomas, also Daniel and Pranav, that's exactly the kind of people that you're trying to, with your work, to reach. And so everybody just sit tight, keep the questions coming, and we're going to get to those soon. Right now, I'd like to turn over to Daniel from the Ensure Resilience Global Partnership. Daniel, one of the things that you're trying to do is to provide, to help countries ramp up risk transfer solutions for people who might be right at the last mile. We really look forward to hearing your comments. And thanks again, Sylvia and Thomas, so far.
Thank you very much, Coco, and hello to everyone. It's really great to be here with all of you and to have the opportunity to present the Ensure Resilience Global Partnership, and then to sort of move into the field or the specific area of social protection and how that fits into the work we're doing. I'm trying to upload my screen right now, but I think Sylvia, you have to stop your presentation for me to do that. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And I'm just making a couple of adjustments here. Wonderful. Okay, thank you very much for your patience. And yes, as I was saying, well, I work in the Secretariat of the Ensure Resilience Global Partnership, and our goal is to promote financial resilience for the world's most vulnerable. And we see social protection, adaptive shock responsive social protection, as a component of the work that we're doing, and specifically comprehensive risk finance strategies. A lot of big words there. I'll try to explain them to you in as much as I can in this short time. Just to start off where we are at the moment. I mean, we all know that we are in a risk environment. that is exacerbating through climate change, which is the challenge of our lifetime, and it's further compounded the risks under climate change, or the risks that are driven by climate change are further compounded by the pandemic, especially for poor and vulnerable people. And we saw some examples already highlighted by Sylvia and Thomas. At the same time, we have an institutional environment working on solutions with very different perspectives and a very fragmented approach. And different perspectives obviously lead to difficulties in creating solutions that are comprehensive, that encompass the different, or that can target the different target groups and address the risks accurately, and can also really pool in the necessary and the most relevant resources. So the Intra-Resilience Global Partnership is trying to promote financial preparedness and contribute to global resilience efforts by creating a multi-stakeholder platform. And you see this comic here on the right, which says it quite well. We like to bring different people from radically different fields and wait for the friction to produce heat, light, and magic. Sometimes it takes a while, and indeed it does. We started in 2017, and we've done incredible progress so far in bringing more than 80 members now together. We have set up a common agenda with a common ambition that is part of the UN Secretary General's Climate Action Plan. We work closely with our colleagues at UNFCCC and other frameworks that are promoting resilience around the world. And we've also brought together the leading implementation partners in the field of climate and disaster risk finance and insurance. I'll get to that in a moment. So our goal is really to promote that collaboration, to have a platform where implementation efforts can be coordinated and where synergies in the countries are really unlocked. And we also have various working groups, various events where we try to share learnings and best practices, and ultimately working with countries. We are a V20, this is the group of vulnerable countries, and G20 co-led partnership. So our ambition is really to link needs on the ground with solutions, be it from implementing partners like the World Bank, like the German Development Bank, KfW, and others, or also, and very importantly, the private sector. Climate and disaster risk finance and insurance, or in the abbreviation CDRFI, is any form of pre-arranged and predictable financing on standby that can support early action, relief, and recovery after disasters and climate shocks. So it's really about supporting both governments as well as people in having mechanisms, financial mechanisms that they can rely on, that when something happens, when a disaster strikes, payouts are made, and those payouts can support and strengthen efforts to act early and even in an anticipatory stage to these disasters, but also to provide disaster relief and the more long-term recovery and reconstruction. Embedded, we also highlight that because for us it's really important that CDRFI is embedded in broader risk management strategies, in broader adaptation plans, and other efforts to strengthen resilience on a national level. So not wanting to go into details here, this is the Intra-Resilience Vision 2025. It's what guides our daily work, what all our members have endorsed and support and have committed to drive action along these areas. 500 million people protected through CDRFI, 10% of losses covered, 80 countries with comprehensive disaster risk finance strategies in place, and also bringing in the private sector with a 5 billion commitment of risk capital that is offered through the insurance industry. Just some of the main targets that we are working towards until 2025. And moving into social protection as an element of risk finance, an element of having this form of predictable, prearranged financing to support early action. There's basically three benefits that I would like to highlight in terms of integrating social protection into a risk finance strategy. And I know Pranav will for sure be sharing more details, and hopefully that builds on what I'm saying now. First of all, it's following a rules-based approach, and what that means is that social protection can build on insurance-like principles. I mentioned the aspect of having a prearranged and predictable form of funding, and this is sort of embedded in insurance, and we think it can also be integrated into social protection mechanisms, which allows then people to plan for disaster response. It allows an evidence-based decision making. So this is number one. The second benefit is what we like to call risk layering. This is the concept of looking at different types of risks and different levels of risk depending on the probability with which they will occur, and then identifying the most cost-effective contingency financing mechanisms or risk finance mechanisms to address the different layers of risk, be it hurricane risks, drought risks, flood risks, and then depending on the intensity and the frequency of these different risks. And we think adaptive social protection, and there are good examples of this already happening on the ground, they can address specific risk layers, and they can piggyback on existing existing insurance, but also insurance can piggyback on existing social protection systems. So we also think microinsurance can be a part of social protection strategy, particularly for those vulnerable groups that can afford insurance, and then being complemented by social protection for the poorest and those that cannot afford insurance. And having that within one strategy, looking at the different layers of risk, can optimize the overall response and the overall reaction and the overall resilience to climate risks. Finally, targeting. I mentioned before the difference between vulnerabilities and also income levels, and we think that not all people can be adequately supported in their exposure and vulnerability to climate risks through insurance. So having social protection as an additional element is helpful, because you can really address the most vulnerable, but you can also see where does that group is most accurately addressed through insurance versus social protection. So it opens up a lot of data and information when you use risk models, risk data to look at your population and the different groups, and then make a decision, a risk-informed decision on what are the most appropriate instruments, taking due consideration of the social context and also of the community and the approaches the community can bring upstream to an overall solution. So we think, and we see this in many parts of the world, that through social protection, a government can enhance its disaster risk finance strategy, and thereby also enhance its overall resilience strategy. And it allows us to address vulnerable people that we couldn't have addressed without social protection. And I think with that, I'd like to hand over back to Coco. Thank you very much. And I look forward to your questions. And I also look forward to Pranav's additional ideas on social protection. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much, Daniel. For these last three things that you mentioned, it sounds to me like you're talking a lot about the design of systems that can really go the distance and help vulnerable people. And we're really looking forward to the interaction with you and the other panelists just after Pranav. And Pranav, now we go to you. And you'll bring up you'll round off our panel. Pranav, you've been working at ILO and you have a lot of experience with innovation in these risk transfer tools. We're excited to hear your remarks on how they might play a role in helping people weather these shocks and disruptions. Thanks.
Hello, everybody, and thank you very much to everybody who has tuned in. Also, a big thanks to all my fellow presenters who have set a great base on establishing the needs for social protection and the linkages with the insurance. What I think we'd like to do over the next couple of minutes is to understand a bit more about the three basic issues that we are trying to talk of. Issues around climate change, how is that presenting a bigger challenge for social protection? What are the compoundings that COVID-19 has brought about? And how is it playing out in perhaps a few global contexts, as well as especially in the context of Indonesia? A lot of it is based on the work that the ILO's Impact Insurance Facility and the Social Finance Program, of which I am a part of, does and has been doing over a period of time. And we are trying to use some of the lessons that have been learned in actually making a lot of the theoretical concepts into reality. A lot of my panelists have talked about the importance of social protection and how, as a universal social protection strategy to cover everybody around and who can get impacted. And the word resilience has been mentioned a number of times. And it is around this entire exercise of building resilience that the importance of insurance or the linkage with insurance, how it can support the entire social protection programs, how it can be a facilitator for building this community resilience, individual resilience, resilience of the state actors, as well as at meso level of the aggregators that Thomas brought about. That's the bit of a game that we are trying to highlight also, not just globally, but also in specific countries. So it's kind of a known fact, and I wouldn't like to beat around the bush. There are more qualified people from MCI, etc., around this, that climate shocks are a recognized driver of poverty, and I'm using poverty in a general sense of the word, because connected to this from a social protection angle, it's a recognized driver of no well-being. So well-being gets impacted there. And because of climate change, which has increased the frequency and intensity of the climate shocks, it is kind of contributing to this entire debate about more of poverty, more acute. And there are various studies like by the World Bank, which estimates that unless social protection and policy adaptation happens, climate change will increase extreme poverty by over 100 million. Now, in this sense, when it is compounded by the COVID-19 crisis, it has revealed quite clearly the catastrophic impact where lack of planning, as Daniel very elegantly brought about, prearranged planning, or the lack of social protection coverage, as impacting over 4 billion people in the world. The fact is that a lot of this planning that is being talked about, a lot of formal social protection covers, are available to only 20% of the world's population, and more than 50% lack any coverage of it. There's been a lot of talk and there's been a lot of stress on social protection and by the international label standards as a basic right. But like I mentioned, over 55% don't have it. And this is linked to the insufficient progress in closing the social protection financing gaps. It requires effort, it requires investments both by the government and now progressively by the private sector that can help the government in kind of helping it. So what is the challenge? I mean, okay, fine, people are not covered, what can be done? So how can social protection actually prioritize between the vulnerable sections of the population and between those who are already poor? What are the roles that people can play is something that we need to look at. And how can insurance play a facilitative role at each and every level that Thomas brought out initially to kind of reduce the pressure on social protection systems to effectively provide and build resilience amongst the target customers or the target populations. That's the issue at stake. And if we look at the linkages between social protection and agriculture, because if you talk generally of social protection, you think of health insurance, you think of various other issues, but given the climate context, it is quite clear that climate insurance, that climate change and climate risks impact those who are least able to prepare for it. So therefore, the rural communities, the agriculture communities who are more dependent on their land, their dependencies and their preparedness levels are low. And therefore, in several constituencies, the protection of agriculture and agriculture dependent households is now a topic of huge discussion. In that, we've seen over the years that insurance as a mechanism for social protection, as Daniel mentioned some time back, Thomas mentioned initially, it's been looked at as a mechanism to protect these households with some amount of investment against climate-related risks. And there is definitely a potential to build synergies for overall sustainability and overall resilience. But of course, it requires a huge partnership approach, brought about, mentioned earlier also. And it also requires patience and building a systems approach because of the cross-sectoral coordinations, because of the number of players and the diversity of players involved, and an integrative approach in dealing with the entire situation. Why is there so much of talk about climate risk, disaster risk insurance? Besides the fact that it kind of is impacting people who are actually the frontliners in this, insurance needs and has been actively used both as a protective tool, now that everyone is comfortable with, that it protects against setbacks to various assets of yours, but also important is the productive role of is insurance in building this entire resilience and sustainability, where it allows farmers and impacted populations to engage in riskier but more productive and activities that give higher returns, whether it is be through increased investments on the farm, whether it is to increased access to credit or getting better inputs. So therefore, there's this huge link around insurance, issues related to climate risks, and the social protection angle that we are talking of. Globally, there's been a lot happening around this, and we've seen it happening a lot in Asia, somewhat in Africa, in Indonesia too, where to run a quick list, we have the Prime Minister's Fasal Bima Yojana, the Prime Minister's crop insurance scheme, where the government provides huge subsidies, but the entire program is run by private sector. I mean, I wouldn't say entire, but the private sector has a huge role to play in enrollment of the farmers and bringing it out in the population. Because of government subsidies, because of role of commercial banks in it, almost 50 million people are enrolled in the entire program. So that's a huge program there. Similarly, in Kenya, the Kenya Livestock Insurance Program, where the government provides the support, but private insurance companies do and enroll members into the livestock insurance, which is based on both protecting the livestock as well as replacing the livestock in the country. A very popular as well as an important program there is growing. Uganda has a similar scheme going in their country with the private sector and the government supporting it. And in Indonesia itself, the AUTP program, sorry, Sylvia and others, I wouldn't like to pronounce it. It's a bit of a tongue twister, but the AUTP program, which is,
yeah, business.
Yeah, so which is based on basically focusing on rice insurance, where the farmers just pay 36,000 Indonesian IDRs, and they are covered up to 6 million. It's very much there and run by the government organization Jasindo, and we've looked at all these things in connection with the Ministry of Fisheries that runs the shrimp insurance programs. So therefore, we are seeing governments progressively relying on the private sector to bring about and a greater play and greater outreach in the programs. We heard Thomas mentioning LPP in the initial stages. Nobody knows LPP better than Coco, who initially started it, but that's looking at not just the agricultural programs, but agriculturists, but also anybody and everybody whose livelihoods can get impacted by extreme weather conditions. Whether it is a taxi driver who can't take his taxi out because of excess rains, whether it is a salon owner whose approach to whose shop is flooded and there are no customers and livelihoods gets impacted. So the point that I'm trying to make is that there is an increased recognition that insurance can help in playing an important role in ameliorating some of the pain that climate risks issues have. If we look at Indonesia particularly, the slide is too busy. I don't want to get into it and into too many details, but we are saying that basically they are both informal as well as formal risk management strategies being adopted already by the population at risk, both in planning for disasters and climate related risks, as well as after the risks have happened. The informal mechanisms can be drastic things like selling of assets. But on the other hand, we are looking at public safety nets playing a role, loans being available, the savings being organized, or the communities playing a role, as Sylvie very nicely mentioned. The issue with Indonesian insurance market is that it's still in a very early stage of growth, and it is very much dependent on various value chain players. The figure basically shows the various stages in which insurance markets develop, and if you look at Indonesia particularly, the market, even within the financial sector space, the insurance is still quite small. It's just 12% of the entire process. It was a 13 billion market in 2013. Now the microinsurance network states that it is over a 20 billion US dollar market. So there is growth and there are sectors that are growing fast, but as you can see, penetration levels remains low. And that's where the big challenge is. However, as we have seen in various studies and various work that has been done, that there are various players in addition to the government that are playing a role. So the ILO from its side works a lot with the value chain players in the market, whether they are input providers, whether they are farm output buyers or processors who actually can provide leverage to the farmers and do the aggregation, the meso level aggregation that Thomas talked about. There is also a growing importance and one factor that plays a role of group leaders. So communities have group leaders, farmer associations have group leaders. So there is a huge reliance on, let's say, these influencers or important players who need better understanding, who need better education, so that they can translate the message to their communities and do it. But the fact remains, and as you can see from the picture, the influencers are interested in understanding and appreciating what their efforts are. And through them, there is a lot of scope for doing that. One thing we must try and understand is that insurance cannot itself work on its own. So therefore, it needs to work in a combination with other financial instruments, such as savings, risk pooling, uh, government support by catastrophe bonds, etc. And that's where the entire issue comes around. Now, as we see, how did COVID actually impact all these things? It's very nice to say that all these players are playing a role. But whether they are small and medium enterprises, whether they are microfinance institutions, they have all been impacted by COVID. And because of lack of, let's say, face-to-face interaction, lack of ability to travel because of various lockdowns in all those places. But the interesting part is that it has brought about an opportunity for technology to play a role. Sylvia very elegantly pointed out the work that technology has been doing there. And I'm aware of the question that Coco asked in terms of the digital work and how it doesn't work. But the fact remains that one of Indonesia's agri-tech companies has added on 20,000 new users since they started Tanny Hub. You heard the millions that Sylvia herself talked about. So there are opportunities that exist and are constantly being looked at and being exploited. Now, just to round off the entire discussion, we'd like to state that poverty rates can definitely be reduced in the long term by targeting social protection to households who are not only to poor households, but also to vulnerable households in that sense of the term. Insurance can provide a kind of a framework to work with. Insure Resilience Partnerships is already working on that. And whether it is through financing of premium, whether it is the beneficiaries themselves paying part of the premium and the rest being subsidized, it can create a pool and where both national and international players can play a role in helping the farmers with the problems that they face related to climate risks, of course. The only caveat here is that while insurance is relevant, but it can work only up to a point. There are other other players that need to play a role on it. And subsidies, of course, can provide a definite pool in carrying forward the entire exercise. So those are a few things that I wanted to share. And with this, back to you, Coco, and I'll be open to discussions anymore.
Thanks so much, Pranav. We've really now rounded the discussion off, and you bring us right to what's relevant today and is on everyone's minds. Not only do we have a variety of disruptions all over the world, floods or droughts or fires and things that really affect people's safety and well-being and ability to put their kids into school and keep them there and feed their families. But of course, the pandemic is first and foremost on the minds of so many people. So really, thanks for bringing in those insights. And now everybody, as promised, now we have the excellent opportunity to start interacting with our panelists. Everybody's provided great insights. Already we have questions coming in, and I'm going to field a first round of questions to our panelists. For all of you listening, please keep them coming. We love your questions, and it really enriches our discussion. And also panelists, please interact with each other. We have so much to learn. I know you guys have been colleagues for a long time, and please share that insight with us. So let me just give you an overview of some of the questions that we've gotten. This is just the first round. So we had a question from Callie about how do we ensure that people don't fall through the cracks. A lot of people are operating, particularly really vulnerable people, are operating in an informal space. So Thomas, I'm going to put that question to you from Kali Nia. And this, by the way, Sylvia, this question is coming to you. Nia asked about the experience with your app. Have you seen new social networks developing in particular areas? If so, what are the characteristics of those groups? These apps provide us a chance to learn a lot about the people who are using them. And Mia would love to learn more about that. And then finally, it's really two questions from Mia. Are you finding that people in rural areas or urban areas, or maybe kind of a mix, are using the app that you were telling us about? Pranav, a question came that I'm going to field to you. It came over social media, I think Twitter, and this really speaks to COVID-19. Pranav, have social protection schemes helped address poverty traps that we're really seeing either deepen or open up related to these pandemic implications for people? And do you see, and Daniel, I don't know if you can hop in on this second part of the question from our Twitter person, whoever you are. We're so glad that you joined us. Maybe for both of you, is COVID-19 helping those of you, those of us who are designing and implementing social protection schemes? Is it a moment of rethink? Are we learning some things about social protection that might affect how those schemes are designed and implemented? Okay, that is just the first round of questions. I think that we'll probably have enough time in our discussion. We go until 1/2 this hour. I think we'll be able to get through 2 or 3 rounds. So everybody in the audience, please continue to put your comments in the Q&A or in the chat. And maybe this first round, Thomas, we'll start off with you with Kelly's question. How do we make sure that people don't fall through the cracks?
Yeah, thank you. Also, thank you to Kali. I know it's very early in your country. Good morning. I also have a little issue about the COVID question. I don't want to steal the butter of Pranav's bread, but I have shoot out a little thing on this too, the COVID question. So for Kali, I mean, the approaches that are being done today are highly professional, and people are deeply looking into who are the vulnerable poor. Also, Daniel can tell a story, and also the aid organizations like GTZ or you name it, USAID, they have a close look on who is at risk and who has no formal market, who has maybe no mobile phone access. So there are deep analysis, and also the V20 countries, which Daniel was mentioning, they look deep who are the vulnerable poor. And last but not least, the NGOs, they always put a finger if we tend to forget a group of people, being people with disabilities or so. So it's well thought over, and Kali, be sure that this aspect is being handled. And briefly on the COVID one, because I was also looking into COVID issues. You know, after Ebola, there was immediately the World Bank put up a pandemic emergency financing facility called PEF. And they, in April, said, oh, due to COVID, we need to help the vulnerable poor, the countries. And they gave 195 million immediately to these countries back in April, because they saw there was need for action. And from the professional insurers and reinsurers, they are now looking into their wordings, into their agreements, how COVID is reflected. And of course, they need to address the issue in future contracts. So I'm pretty sure that COVID will also change the way of underwriting, as we say, and also in the social protection agreements, we will find a strong COVID link. So this is it, and I give back.
Yeah, thanks very much. Sylvia, what's the experience been with your app? Mia was really curious about that.
Hi, Mia. Okay, let me answer the second one first. You asked whether there is our audience from rural or from urban. When we started with the urban area, especially in Jakarta and Greater Jakarta, because they are prone to flood. And then I personally had a doubt if we work in rural, whether they have enough signal or not. But then apparently Indonesia is amongst the highest internet penetration in the world. And even in the rural now, more and more Yes, most of them have a highly internet connection and utilization. That's why we decide, okay, we also work mix between urban and rural. Sometimes there's a challenge, of course. For example, in urban, it's easier to introduce the technology because they are more used to. And in rural, we have more training and more socialization about our app. So also with it's also interesting about the demographic use. Previously, we start with the mothers, 35 up, years old up, but then we have also again difficulties on introducing technology for them. So now we try to shift into younger generation, the millennials and the students. It's easier, and hopefully they can teach their parents for technology. Because also one of our concern is try to increase the digital literacy and also try to avoid misusing of internet and social media, because it happens a lot. So we also put that aspect into our training.
So there's
And
also,
then with
Sylvia, sorry to
jump in.
So there's also kind of that intergenerational learning that you're just mentioning. Kids have cell phones, are very media and digital savvy, and they help their entire family and maybe their networks. That's really,
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's the idea. Yeah, that's exactly, that's the idea. And then we for the first question, we witnessed the growing of society network in several areas. I can mention one in Lombok for sure, the one that led by Ibu Siti Sanisa. So this like the entire sub-district area, from the head of the sub-district and bunch of elementary school teachers and bunch of youths. So they all gathered and they really have their interest on using this Atmago as like a platform for their community. So they often share their writing, their stories about the initiative for tackling climate change. Sometimes we support them, and sometimes also interested because they really have a platform to to address to cater their hobby of writing, because they always thought that it's difficult to put their writing in public. So with this platform, they have like a free platform. So they often put novels even there in our stories. Really like this related with their activities on daily activities as teachers. That's in Lombok. Another example in urban area is in Jogja. So we also receive like interest from one of the head of sub-district, because we go down to that level, sub-district, below district. And then this head of sub-district requested us to help her to map the potential in her area. So we try to create like a piloting area there, so comprising of different group, mothers, youths, students, businessmen, businesswomen, small business woman or man, and then we train them to create like a a database, a profile. So we encourage them to write in Atmago. So they put all of their story, their organization, their business, they put it in Atmago, and then we collect them as a profile. So this profile helped the head of the sub-district to build the local policy. So like she said to us that I need that to understand my people, to understand the potencies that are occurring in my people. So that's a good example that happened in Yogyakarta. So until now, they still keep posting about their good stories.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much the example of the community that we developed.
Yeah, super. Thanks so much. And, speaking of innovation, Pranav, I've been picking on you. All of you are innovating. I keep mentioning that with you. Could you just deepen a little bit this question that was coming from our social media about COVID-19. What are we learning? Where are we seeing poverty traps open up or deepen? And is social protection helping so far from what you can see?
Yeah, so sometimes after this crisis entering Indonesia, we realized that we need to quickly build the resilience toward this. And we aim to the rebuilding of small business. That's why we create this microsite. One of the features are radio streaming. So the idea is to profiling small business doers, and we let them to share the stories about how they survive, how they struggle during this pandemic. So that's one thing that we've been doing in our microsite. In Atmago itself, we have one of category we call job. Yeah, so job. So this is really unique and receive a lot of attention because user posting job that are not common. So for example, you are a farmer and you are looking for the seller of boots. Yeah, it might sound very little, but it's really like something that you might not find in a common website. Yeah, example like if you a meatball seller, he really try to find a good local meat resource. So that's where they come from, interact each other in that category. So that's pretty much we're doing in Atma.
That's so interesting. You're really treating it as online marketplace almost, or a platform.
Yeah, and a unique, not common.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Sylvia.
Yeah.
And then Pranav, just going over to you, insights or further insights about poverty traps, COVID-19, and social protection. And similar to what you just heard, Thomas and Daniel, do hop in. I'm sure you're also gathering some insights. Pranav?
So, so thank you very much, Coco. And thank you very much, Sylvia, for actually sharing the first insight that I would have shared is this increasing use of technology. So whether it's an online marketplace or farmers wanting to sell goods and trying to find how best they can do it. The problem there still remains is that while transaction is online, goods still need to move physically. And that's where the constant issue of how to do, what are the arrangements to be done, and the role for infrastructure and government comes into play. From an ILO's perspective, certainly because governments are facing this double whammy of trying to deal with the health pandemic as well as responding to the social and economic effects. I mean, a couple of months back, newspapers were full of migrant issues in India and in various other countries. So I guess that's where the issue is slightly there on how much can technology be in addition to the human touch. We certainly believe that social protection is an indispensable part of any coordinated policy response to the unfolding crisis, essentially towards building resilience. And we have seen governments reacting as well as the financial sector reacting in an extremely positive way. We've seen loan moratoriums happening. So for 3 months in various countries, 6 months, your installments have been deferred. Of course, it comes back to bite you ultimately because your loan period goes up. But at least your immediate issue, you can focus on getting your daily work organized rather than bothering about where to organize money to pay your EMIs. The other issue that we've seen is this collation of services. So call it bundling, call it aggregation, call it whatever you want. There's been a huge movement in the pandemic times of this collaborative, cohesive working to bundle products and services and then ensure that they reach the customers in an appropriate manner. And last but not the least has been a marked growing effort towards creating better awareness, and not only creating better awareness, but also better education. So we saw Sylvia sharing some of the education tools that were there. In various countries, this entire drive towards washing hands, use of sanitizers, use of masks, etc., has been done not just by the government, but by various players along various chains. In fact, if you take India as an example, there was, I mean, the country had one of the highest uh, purchases in the winter crop, the rabi crop. The production was good. The thing was it. Even the sowing in the monsoon season has been good. And one thing you must have noticed globally, nowhere did we see a food shortage in that sense of the term. People could buy food, whether online or whether doorstep deliveries in other ways. So one of the very positive things that has happened is this resilient infrastructure or supply chains that remained in place. Yes, there have been blockages. Yes, there have been things, but we haven't heard people dying of hunger because of the crisis. So I think that's an extreme positive that's a good positive that we need to take. The other has been this issue around, Sylvia mentioned the growth of technology even at the last mile. And yes, the pictures that you saw with me in the field were actually geotagged pictures. So you do have media, as well as among the farmers, we see a huge role of social media playing a role. So whether it's WhatsApp, whether it's other communication channels, postings, understanding what is happening in the neighbor's place, what is happening in the neighboring village. So that enhanced communication is certainly there, is one of the positive fallouts of the COVID crisis that has been happening. Yes, much more needs to be done. The governments need to, I can't say generate money, but need to reallocate funding towards various development measures. But I guess it's one step at a time at current levels.
Yeah, thank you so much, Pranav. And that leads into kind of the second part of the question that came up, which is, what are lessons learned if governments working together with civil society and the private sector and other stakeholders are seeing the performance of social protection tools right now during the pandemic? How might governments and others adjust their social protection efforts, lessons learned from COVID? I think it also goes back to what you were saying, Pranav. It's super positive that we aren't seeing people go well, I think that you said going without nutrition. You had a special wording, but it's not that you're seeing people go hungry in relation to the pandemic. That almost suggested to me that there are many tools working together to help people. And so what's the design of social protection look like moving forward? And Thomas, Daniel, Sylvia, Pranav, I'm interested in all of your thoughts.
Okay, Daniel, you want to take a first stab?
Yeah, I can take a first step, but please come in. Well, I think from an insurance perspective, there's a couple of learnings from the current pandemic. And Thomas, you mentioned the pandemic emergency financing facility by the World Bank, PEF, well, the way PEF was designed is that it was supposed to trigger payouts to countries for diseases like Ebola, right? So very high mortality rates. And with COVID, we're seeing a new pathogen with a very different risk characteristic, and it's a lower, relatively lower mortality rate, but the measures that are taking place to reduce risk are leading to materializations of risk itself. So it's a protractive crisis in a sense that the lockdown in itself has led to risk situations and livelihoods being put at risk, and the lockdown is not necessarily only led by the mortality rate, but by many other factors, and just the need for a government to maintain its health system, even if a low mortality rate is there, you still need, and we saw the images from countries where the response came too late. So I think for the insurance industry and also for social protection, it means that we may need to adjust triggers, that we may need to adjust the way that insurance mechanisms work, not only looking at things like mortality rates, but looking at combinations of risk, like a pandemic hitting together with a climate shock, for example, or a pandemic then leading to a lockdown, and that lockdown then triggering support through a social protection system. So it's I think every crisis has led to a learning, and I think that's probably the sad part about it, that we tend to sort of need these events to realize what we can improve going forward. COVID-19 has certainly been unprecedented in all kinds of ways, and it we see it with governments all around the world not having been prepared and not being really in a struggle to deal with a virus where limited data existed and still in some ways exists. So that is a real challenge, and it requires a global and coordinated effort with countries to work on how to deal with these sort of unknown unknowns, if you want, and then ensure that the risk management systems and the risk financing systems are flexible enough to accommodate for these sort of these particularities, even when a virus doesn't have a relatively high mortality rate. So just a learning from looking at PEF and other mechanisms that had been in place. But yeah, over to you, Thomas, Pranav, Sylvia, you may have additional insights.
Yeah, I just briefly add, I mean, ahead of my slide, there will be a game-changing situation, because everybody will ask what happens if another COVID affects our people or our country or the whole globe. So despite the tragedies we see now, and my heart goes with infected and the people we lost in COVID, on the other hand, we maybe were lucky to have not a more aggressive virus. But now we will look into these issues, getting a more aggressive virus, and the insurance sector can play a huge role. They know the probability of having a 1 in 1,000 years windstorm and a 1 in 1,000 years earthquake in the same month. So they know these probabilities, and they will definitely calculate the probabilities of infection, another COVID, going together with climate change effects, such as a large windstorm or a large flood wave, flash flood. So honestly, I'm very positive, despite all these tragedies we see, and despite all the so nobody knows what to do now, but I think that this will clear up. In half a year, we'll see tons of studies which will give us insight and will teach us how to better react. And the dialogue between medicine and governments, between the insurance sector, is fostered and even pushed, I would say. So I see a very positive future despite the problems we see now. Back to you, Coco.
Yeah, thank you so much. Just a quick timekeeping. This has been a fabulous discussion, and the questions are rolling in, and we have simply pushed up against our time limit. And so Pranav and Sylvia, I'd like to kind of give the last word to you. Thank you so much for all of our participants all over the world participating via social media and here in the Zoom chat room, and the questions. We have noted your questions. I forwarded them to our panelists. I hope that we can continue this discussion. I'm so sorry we haven't been able to get to all of them really, really great questions. But Pranav and Sylvia, just to round off our discussion, we're clearly in a moment where we're learning a lot about social protection, risk transfer, and disruptions. There's a lot of things going on in the world. What are your takeaways? What have we learned, and how can we continue to do better and better in the future?
Now, you want to go ahead?
Go for it, Sylvia. I just have a very short statement to go for it.
Yeah, I have a very short statement because apparently that I am the only in the different side of the three other panelists. So it's clear for us that what we can do is creating more stronger and stronger social network because it works. And during this pandemic, especially, we see that the online lifestyle is even more, so that we see our opportunity to work more and more in this aspect. So that's what we can do, building stronger social network.
Thank you, Sylvia. So yes, in addition to the network building, I think for sustainability of social protection goals, I'll refer back to Thomas's 3 T's, and especially to the middle T of time. It takes time. It takes trust amongst various people, which the networks can certainly build. And there are various, they need to be compounded by obviously certain fiscal measures by the government, whether it is small increases in taxation for various sectors or boosts being provided to sectors that have been deeply impacted but can recover and rebound quickly. That's the cohesiveness of community, government, SMEs, as well as the aggregators who are SMEs, a lot of whom are SMEs, and that's where the bulk of economic recovery lies, because they can actually work together to bring about not only coming back and rebounding, but also progressing in a more cohesive manner in the times to come.
Thank you so much. For all of you worldwide, especially to our panelists, this has been a session, an online virtual session of our Summer Academy looking at world adaptation and risks futures. It's hosted by United Nations University and supported and co-organized by Munich Re Foundation. Today we've been looking at the particular role of non-state actors and lessons learned from COVID-19. We hope you'll continue to join us in this academy, this virtual academy experience, looking at the role of social protection, adaptation, and risk. And with that, wishing you guys all a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.